Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the broadcast this evening. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Nice to see you again.
Yes, sir. Good evening to our viewers. Thank you all for joining the broadcast this evening. Please feel free to share the links when you get it. Sir, I'll go straight into some of the major developments that we're seeing across the world today, and let's start with the United States, sir. I think it was last week or the week before we talked about the Democrats, and you had some views about where things would be. As of this point in time, I think things are still in the balance, and would like to get your views, your reaction to the midterm elections in the United States, sir.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I think it was a good night for the Democrats because normally midterm elections, the party occupying the White House loses. And at times it loses big time. Most analysts were expecting that due to the effects of the Russian-Ukrainian war on oil prices and inflation rates, that the Democrats were going to lose big time. There were cautionary voices, not too many, but who claimed that Roe versus Wade, that's the abortion issue, and the threat by the Republicans that if they get hold of Congress, they were going to impeach Biden, could mean that a lot of voters will become cautious about voting for the Republicans. There is a third factor, which I think all of us missed, and that is the changing demography in the United States. I think the Generation Z, as they are called, the increase in young immigrant votes actually have helped the Democrats this time. And that's why the Congress is still in a toss-up, even 2 days after the elections. And so I believe that even though the performance of Biden was lackluster, he's not an energetic speaker. But let us not forget that Obama lost the midterm elections in spite of his charismatic profile. So it was a good night for the Democrats, and I think it was a good night for Biden as well. The loser in all of this actually was Trump, because he was expecting, like most of us, that the margin of victory of the Republicans was going to be massive, and that will sweep his ambition to contest in the next presidential elections. He had even gone as far as to tell his supporters to expect a major announcement by him, I believe, next week. He was so cocky that his ambition was going to be swept along with the victory of the Republicans. Now he's going to have to rethink his own strategy. And I understand when I perused the American press early this afternoon, the Wall Street Journal and the New York Daily Post, which are two of Murdoch's newspapers on which Trump could count upon, had in fact now ditched him, and we're now calling on Republicans to think of a life after Trump. That simply showed you how bad things were for Trump.
But sir, do you see any rising names? Some have said it's surprising that the Republican Party is still, to a great extent, even giving the signals that there may still be that glimmer of hope that Trump could come back in. Are you seeing any other person rising up that could be a challenge for a Trump position in future?
Well, you have the governor of Florida of Cuban descent, who won by a 20 percentage point between him and his Democratic challenger. Obviously, that is a high-profile Republican on the block. And the news have it that Trump was actually already threatening him that should he decide to run, Trump has some juicy, scandalous news about him that he will be prepared to use. So that is one. I particularly don't think he has a national appeal outside Florida. The votes in Florida have usually been controlled by, that Cuban generation that came after Castro came to power in Cuba and expelled their parents or their grandparents. So they tend to be so right-wing that if they lent any further right, they will actually fall off the Florida panhandle into the sea. And I think that's what he's been riding upon. Yes, the United States Trump voters are also right-wing, but I'm not sure that he has credibility among those voters. While we look at the Republicans, don't let us also forget the Democrats. Now, at the time when people thought the Democrats were going to lose big time, they were starting to talk about who would then be the Democratic candidate, since they expect Biden to retire into the sunset. I didn't like what was being said about Kamala Harris. You see, people who occupy the White House their staff have often done their very best to diminish the status and the profile of the vice president, any vice president. I mean, those of us who are old enough to go back to the 60s knew what Johnson suffered under Kennedy. And in fact, Johnson was about to be kicked off the ticket if Kennedy were alive to run for a second term. We also know what Johnson did to Humphrey, his vice president. I think the two presidents who treated their vice presidents with dignity and gave them high-profile assignments were Clinton and Obama himself. I have not been too happy about how Biden has treated Kamala Harris, forgetting that without the votes of her base, without the black votes, he wouldn't be in the White House. And I think that his black supporters, his black mentors in the House should call Biden and remind him of that. Because when they were talking about the possibility of Biden retiring or not going for a second term, they were saying, well, Kamala Harris has been lackluster. She hasn't shined. For God's sake, they were not giving her any opportunities to outshine the president. It's not difficult to outshine Biden. He's such lackluster as an old man, has health problems, so it's not so difficult to outshine him. And that was why deliberately the handlers of Biden diminished the role of Kamala Harris. It reminds me of the problem that Meghan had when she was still part of that royal jamboree. She couldn't wear jewelry that would make her outflash the wife of Williams. She couldn't wear any dress that would make her outflash Kate Middleton. It was just as if they wanted her to dress like a maid. It's the same thing that is happening to Kamala Harris. Should, for health reasons, Biden decides not to run. 2 years is a long time in politics. He said last night that he will run. Well, man proposes, God disposes. Let's just watch.
So one key point about this midterm election, some reports have suggested that there has been more money spent in these midterm elections than at any other time. Are you concerned about the cost of politics? And when you spend that kind of money, billions and billions of dollars, some quarters think that, yeah, people want to make their money back when they get into government, and it's not really about what you're doing in the interest of the people. What do you think about that, sir?
The American system is different from the system in the global South. Let me put it that way. In the American system, it's not the personal money of the candidates. The money, the money spent in the election usually come from supporters who don't expect to put their hands in the kitty to rehabilitate themselves financially if they get in. Whereas in the global South, it's your own money that you spend. And if you are then lucky and you get in, you then steal voters' money, taxpayers' money to recoup your expenses during the election. So if this were happening in the global South, I would be worried because one knows what will happen after. But in the United States, unless you want to go to jail because you'll be caught, and there's also spending limits from one individual that can be made. So they tend to spread out. But you'll be surprised. all those old, grandmother dropping $1 into the bucket and so on. It adds up out of what is 180 million people or so. It all adds up. And then, of course, you've got companies that put money into the kitty for what we should worry about in the United States will be the contribution of the lobbyists. The American Rifle Association, for example, they sponsor candidates and they invest heavily in those candidates so that if those candidates get into Congress, they are going to block any legislation for gun control. That's why in the United States, you've never been able to get reasonable gun control laws, even after the massacre of school children, whether in primary or nursery or sketch or what have you. The control by companies of candidates is the weakest point in the American, or one of the weakest points in the American electoral system.
One point you raised there, sir, is this balance in the Senate and the House that we see, sir. I know President Biden has called it a good day for America, and like you've echoed, sir, it wasn't the clear wipeout. But doesn't the delicate balance we have there make it more difficult for the Biden administration to even get some of their initiatives and agenda through, given the balance? So is it really a win for them?
Yes, it is still a win for the Democrats. Gridlock is American vocabulary contribution to political lexicon. Gridlock. Nothing happens. The Congress will block anything coming from the White House, from the executive wing. You won't be able to get your legislation through. You may not even be able to get your appointments through. They did it to Obama, if you recall. For over a year, the number of judges in the Supreme Court was pegged at 8 because the Republican-controlled Senate will not even consider any nomination from Obama for almost a full year. And yet when Trump was there, an election was just, I think, 1.5 months to go, they approved his the nomination for his nomination to the Supreme Court. So gridlock, Americans are used to it. You recall under Clinton, was it? Twice. The administration had to shut down because they ran out of money. Not that there was no money in the kitchen, but the approval by Congress to spend simply ran out. So they're used to it. They will go through that shenanigans, which does not do democracy much good. Not at the time when they are facing when they are facing competition from China. That's not the time to be fooling around with your electoral shenanigans in Washington. But they'd rather go through that than reform the system.
Let's go to Egypt, sir, and let's talk about COP27. It looks like some African countries, and maybe Africa in general, have actually had a good outing of some sort at the event, given the fact that there was a commitment to create an African climate risk facility, which would make about $14 billion available for climate-related initiatives. What is your take about that, sir?
Against the caveat that this is not my specialty, let me, however, say I've been so proud of the contribution by African leaders, the speech by the Nigerian president is what I have always expected of the leader of the biggest Black nation in the world. It was full of specifics. The language, while being moderate, was to the point, and he rose to the defense of the interest of the global South. When they were talking about this conference, I kept saying to myself, what's going to be the new thing that's going to be said there that can top the Edinburgh conference? And I've been pleasantly surprised that right from the beginning, the global South insisted that the question of compensation for the damage done to the global South by the global North, which had been the consumer in terms of usage of carbon, hydrocarbons, should be debated. And their first victory was that they agreed to put that on the agenda. See, it was necessary, significant, important that the point should be made that the global South is the victim of the excesses of the global North in terms of climate change. And that therefore, we are already, while the whole world is suffering from climate change, we in the global South did not contribute to this, and that therefore we should be compensated. I was quite happy that they got that onto the agenda. Number two, in your intro, you've drawn attention to the fact that now specific sums of money are being committed to not to the compensation, but to actually money needed by the global South to tackle issues of climate change, the flood control that they need. And in fact, this was the right time to have that conference at a time where all of us saw flooding, the kind we've never seen before. And things need to be done. Dams must be built. I'm sure the specialists will come up with the kind of drainages and what have you that needs to be done. I think the British money, the British financial contribution was tied down to where they said flood-resistant crops and agricultural schemes that would be adapted to cope with either the floods for those of us in the rain belt and drought for places like Sudan, Ethiopia, Kenya, and what have you. It's been a good outing, but let me introduce, as I said, we're two caveats now. One, I'm not an authority in this area, and there are authorities who will see things which I'm not seeing. Number two, I must put a warning up front that commitments and disbursements are two different things. The commitments that were made in the Paris conference, how many years ago now? 10, 12 years ago, thereabout, have not been met by the industrialized countries. There was a point which I must bring out by President Buhari in his speech. He said, at the slightest pinch, you don't want your people to suffer, and so you go back to burning coal for energy, but you expect our people in the global south to make sacrifices which you don't want your own people to make. That therefore there's an element of hypocrisy in the postures between the global north and the global south. I thought that was a good point.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, sir. Let me go to Australia here, sir. And this is where we look at a comment from the defense minister in Australia, who has ordered a review of their national security laws after it turned out that some of their pilots may have been training the Chinese with their expertise. What is your view about that position, sir? Because I think the UK is also echoing the same statement of changing their laws to stop UK pilots working for third-party agencies that then work for China.
I've never been able to understand how skills acquired in such sensitive fields as strategic and military sectors would be freely available for transfer to third countries, never mind the relationship between you and that third country. I mean, was this being, I don't believe for 1 minute that the Australians and the British were not aware that this was going on and did not think it's something that should be plugged. When you are a scholar in this field, you start to think of the possibility of espionage. Were they allowing these people? These are ex-pilots. And I read the language of the British one, which seemed to imply that even serving pilots were being recruited. How possible that is, I don't know. But I will be very, very suspicious if there is not some, intelligence James Bond shenanigans going on. We'll let them be recruited so they could feed us back with the state of Chinese technical level and all that kind of thing. Or else, even I, who am not in the field, will never for 1 minute have allowed a trained pilot, even though he's retired, to be recruited by a competitor. I mean, everybody knows that China has been a competitor to the West for donkey years. I couldn't believe it when I read it. But they play games, and at times they think we don't see through this. We don't see through these games. We do see through them.
Let us look at a comment coming from Saudi Arabia, sir, and Iran. And this is Iran saying to Saudi Arabia that their strategic patience may be running out with Saudi Arabia. And this is because of some of the things that are showing up in the press that Iran is not happy about. Do you see this as a significant threat from Iran to Saudi Arabia? And secondly, do you see the situation escalating significantly beyond where it is now?
Well, you recall last week we dealt with this issue where coming from where I had suggested that probably some of the information being made available to Saudi Arabia about threats from Iran may be geared to, in a way, repairing the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States. We know for the past, 10, 15 years that there have been clashes between Iran and Saudi Arabia in the war going on in Yemen. In fact, Yemen has just been a proxy battleground between the two. We know that there have been problems with Hezbollah, their presence in Lebanon, which is not just Saudi Arabia, but Israel look askance at. Presence of Hezbollah in Syria, presence of revolutionary guards in Iraq. So this is not new. But the issue then but it has not prevented Iran and Saudi Arabia cooperating in OPEC, mutual interests. But what exactly is happening that the strategic patience of Iran is being stretched to its limit? I don't know, but it's a new language, new vocabulary, strategic patience, being stretched. We'll just watch.
Let's talk a little bit about the Russia-Ukrainian war. It was meant to be a quick operation. It was meant to be a special operation. Russia was meant to just go in, execute their special operation and come out. But now it's turning out to be a really bad outing for Russia. And over the last few weeks, we've been hearing about significant gains on the Ukrainian side. And for the first time in a long time in the war, the Russian defense minister came out to say they were pulling out of Kherson. This is becoming a big sort of defeat for Russia. How do you react to that message, sir? And where do you see things developing to now that Russia is taking this sort of back foot position?
I've never seen a war fought like this. Number one, for about the past 3 weeks, we had known that Russia could not sustain its hold on Kherson. We had known that. what game then is being played by the way the announcement then came out officially? Two high-powered Russian military officials were simply talking, and it was being filmed. And it was like a casual comment. Oh, well, I think I'll order our troops to withdraw to the eastern bank of the river. And then we will move on from there. Now, you don't take such strategic decisions in such a cavalier attitude. It was deliberate. You know, this was being staged. Was it being staged in order to reassure Russians that, oh, there's nothing to it, you know? It's just not even a strategic move, just a tactical move on our part. It doesn't signify anything. It's just a whole lot of noise. But this is a decision which actually was made by Putin at the highest level 3 weeks ago. Because if you go through the social media, if you monitor the social media, these things have been filtering out. Recall also that even Ukraine has been screaming at the top of his voice that the dam in that area had been mined and primed to be blown up by the Russians because their presence there was no longer tenable. They've been saying this for about 3 weeks. So, you know, it was a game. The way it was announced, that's what I mean. And also, don't forget that it is starting to leak out that the Americans and the Russians have now been talking through back channels. Again, when news like that filters out, know that it's been deliberately planted with the agreement of both sides. That, well, maybe there would be some development about peace operations, maybe that a softening of attitude, you know, on both sides towards a way out of this intractable war. So we may start to see some de-escalation. That's my own reading of the situation, that maybe Putin had come to a conclusion that this is a war he cannot win. The weapons that he had thought he will use if push comes to shove, the Americans and NATO have let him know the cost, and that cost is no longer acceptable to him. In the meantime, also, have they succeeded in persuading the president of Ukraine that Ukraine is being wiped off the face of the earth? It's all now ashes and dust, and therefore there's going to be a need to cut losses. You know, you don't win. You don't win a war, and there's nothing to show for it but death and, you know, and dissolution. That's not my own definition of victory. So maybe this is the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. It's just a little, you know, like that kind of light when you shine your torch. Or these days, no, we don't use torches anymore. I'm talking like an old man. When you put on your phone, that light, tiny light that your phone shows, maybe this is the beginning of it. That's my reading.
Yes, someone has just put a comment here. Ukraine has threatened to sever relations with Iran for supplying kamikaze drones to Russia. What do you think Ukraine stands to gain from this decision? And do you think it is going to be in Ukraine's best interest?
No. Yes, I can understand the frustration of Ukraine. And that's what I said earlier on about, you know, death and desolation being visited upon it. But Ukraine should understand that just as it has allies supplying it with weapons, Russia will also have allies. Iran is not necessarily anti-Ukraine. Iran is doing it because of its relationship with the United States. This is the nature of vicarious wars. The friend of my friend is my friend. The enemy is my own enemy. I have no problems with Ukraine, but the Americans are pinching me, and the Americans are the friend of Ukraine. Therefore, I also will pinch back indirectly. This is the nature of international politics. For example, Ukraine has been trying to befriend. Ukraine has been complaining that African countries have not been too steadfast in voting against Russia. And yet, when a resolution came before the United Nations Human Rights Commission to criticize racism in the world, Ukraine voted along with the United States against it. Now, how do you make friends of Africans who are the victims of racism when you vote against such a resolution at the Human Rights Commission? He's just made enemies for himself. Because the next time a Ukrainian ambassador gets on the phone, to an African foreign minister, he will be reminded of their vote at the Human Rights Commission. So Ukraine, this is not a holy war. This is not a holy war where Ukraine expects everybody to line up and see the holiness the way Ukraine sees the holiness. No, it's not.
Thank you, sir. Let me pick a question here from Democratic Republic of Congo. Last week, we were talking about the success of Ethiopia and Tigray and the fact that they had come to some sort of peace agreement, which we still need to see how that will unfold in the coming weeks. But now we're hearing of the Democratic Republic of Congo bombing rebels in the country. And number, what is your take on that? Are you seeing that flaring up? And how different is it from a country just dealing with its own internal affairs?
Well, Congo has been an unfortunate child from the beginning of creation. What Congo has suffered in the hands of King Leopold, in the hands of Belgium itself, And even after it became independent, they robbed the Congo of its legitimate prime minister, Patrice Lumumba, a nationalist, one of African heroes. They got him murdered, assassinated in rather gruesome circumstances. And then the CIA lumbered Congo with Mobutu Sese Seko, a kleptomaniac. I mean, who, if he were in Europe, would probably have been sectioned into an asylum for 30-something years. And then all around these boundaries, keep this in mind, the Congo has been surrounded by nations run by Tutsis, who are minorities. In Uganda, but they formed the government. In Rwanda, but they formed the government. And they have decided to, for their own security, to foment insurrection and problems inside the Congo itself. This is in addition to Western companies who are using the minerals of Congo as playgrounds. The Congo should be the richest, one of the richest countries in Africa, but it will not be left alone. What happened, we should keep in mind, about 2 weeks ago, was the new president of Kenya deciding to send Kenyan troops into the Congo to assist the Congolese government. So this must have energized the Congolese troops in taking on the M23, which is the Rwanda-sponsored insurgents in that eastern part of the Congo that has been devastating that eastern part of Congo with their military activities, committing genocide basically against, Congolese citizens and what have you. I hope that sooner or later, African countries, maybe after the success in Ethiopia, which I hope will come to a successful conclusion, will turn their attention to the Congo and call out Rwanda and Uganda. They are not innocent neighbors on this issue.
But sir, should we wait for it to get to a full-blown situation before we start to have all these mediating bodies coming out and talking about this? Because I don't think we're hearing anything about some of these organizations trying to broker a peace arrangement right now. Why wait for it to flare up before they do?
No, it's not a question of why wait for it to flare up. It has never flared down. Never. I just gave you the history from King Leopold up until, Lumumba is not the only prime minister who was assassinated. There is Kabila, who also was assassinated after the death of Mobutu Sese Seko. You see, Congo has never been left alone. You could fight off one attacker, but when you are being attacked from all sides, The EU countries are there with their fingers stuck in the cookie jar. The American companies are there. These are all documented because of the minerals that are there. Then you have the Rwandese forces, Tutsi forces. They are there. Then you have the Ugandan forces. I mean, look, the UN has been there trying to do its best. And what some people may not have noticed is the disappointment by Mali and Burkina Faso against French forces, saying, you've been here for 60 years. We haven't seen what you have done in securing us against the jihadists and what have you. Get out. Let us try new allies. It's the same thing. The Congolese have turned against the United Nations. So you've been here for how many years? Maybe and their peacekeeping operators, they are not, the conditions under which UN troops are there does not even allow the UN troops to frontally take on the M23 and the insurrectionists. They are just there to maintain peace. How can you maintain something that is not there anyway? It's an exercise in moronic language. You can't maintain peace if the peace does not exist. So now the Congolese have even said they want the United Nations to leave and that they would rather take on the security issues themselves. I say a parallel between the UN being tossed out of the Congo and the French being tossed out of the Sahel.
So there's a question someone wants to know your view on here, and this is the news that President Putin would not be attending the G20 meeting in Bali in person. And is this a missed opportunity for Putin to at least present a position for reconciliation with some of the national leaders?
Timing is a critical issue in negotiations. If the timing is not right, you'll be wasting even the opportunity. Right now, I think I mentioned earlier that we've been hearing of, background connection, talks, indirect talks between the United States and Russia. The Secretary of Defense of the United States has openly said he is in touch with his counterpart, the Minister of Defense in Russia. But obviously, it hasn't got to that stage where Putin and Biden can then use the Bali conference to ratify issues or to push the talks along. Right now, the cards are stacked against Russia in that G20 meeting. Most of the G20 people have taken open positions against Russia. Therefore, nothing is to be gained. You can't use such an occasion to present your side of the case when you have been found guilty and you have been condemned by most of those that you will meet there. So I'm not surprised Of course, I would have been happy if the behind the speaker's chair talks, the indirect talks between United States and Russia, I would have been happy if it had got to the stage where now you are starting to look at T's to be crossed and I's to be dotted. Then a meeting between those two probably would have worked, but obviously it hasn't got to that stage. So I am not disappointed. It would have been false hope. Just to say, well, okay, let him turn up and we will see what will happen. No. Serious diplomats don't do that. They calibrate steps that they take until they get to where they think they should be.
One last question before we go, also linked to Russia here, sir. And what this person wants to know is that India has said they would continue to buy oil from Russia, given it is advantageous to them. Will this position hurt Indian foreign policy and their relationships with other nations?
No, it will not. The oil politics and the impact on the oil politics by the Russian-Ukrainian war has shown that each country is acting in its own national interests, whether it is on oil or on the sale of diamonds. Up till now, the EU and the Western countries have not banned buying diamonds from Russia, which is a source of wealth to Russia. If they couldn't get an agreement to ban it because it would have destroyed the Antwerp diamond market. So they continue to buy the diamonds. So why should you expect India that needs the oil, even though it is a concessionary rate, to forgo buying that oil from Russia when you continue to buy the diamonds from Russia because it is profitable to you and it will hurt your economy if you decide to suspend the buying the diamonds from. So really, it's several times, two foreign ministers, the South African foreign minister and the Indian foreign minister, have spelled out the operative principles on their position on this matter, which is, don't tell us what to do. You are acting in your national interest. We will act in our national interest. And there are no counter arguments against that.
Thank you very much, sir. We're just about on time. Thank you for this evening. Thank you to our viewers. I can see a comment for someone who's just joined for the first time. Thank you for joining. Please feel free to share the links when you do get them. And to those on YouTube as well, thank you for being there. On that note, I will
Wait. What do you mean on that? You promised you were going to bring that music of Wakanda Forever, Black Panther #2. You promised us.
I will look for that, sir. I still have time to fulfill my promise. I want to watch the movie first. It comes out tomorrow in the UK.
All right.
So I will watch the movie tomorrow and I will have more to say about it, sir.
Wakanda Forever.
Wakanda Forever. Thank you very much, sir. Good night,
Thank
sir,
you.
and good night to our viewers.